What is the best tyre pressure for cross-country? World Cup XC races are known to run pressures sometimes as low as 15 psi. Is that something the rest of us should be doing, or is that just asking for a puncture? I'm going to put different tyre pressures to the test to find out what really works. Tyre pressures is one of the easiest things you can change on your bike, but also one of the biggest things you can do to change how your bike feels. If your tyre pressures are too hard, you'll lose grip and comfort, but if they're too soft, you'll struggle handling the bike and you'll risk getting a puncture. When it comes to cross-country, the previous conception was that narrower tyres at higher pressures were faster and more efficient. Recently though, things have changed. People have now realised that running wider tyres at lower pressures means you can get more grip, more comfort, and they're also faster. For proof of that, you just need to look at what World Cup XC riders are using these days. They're all running 2.4 tyres at much lower pressures than you'd think. World Cup cross-country athletes will run as fast a rolling tread as they can get away with, and then they'll fine-tune their grip using lower tyre pressures. Despite running lighter casing tyres, XC riders will run much lower tyre pressures than gravity riders, sometimes dropping as low as 15 psi. So why is that? Lower pressures increase the size of your tyre's contact patch and allow your tyre to conform to the ground better. This combination gives you more grip and allows you to roll better over rougher terrain. While these lower tyre pressures might sound like they'll make your bike feel really sluggish and draggy, this is where these new school, really high volume and wide tyres play their part. Without getting too deep into the physics, to support the same weight, a larger volume of air requires less pressure. You can run a 2.4 tyre around 12% lower pressure than a 2.1 tyre, but have the same hoop stress. That's your tyre hardness to you and me. Before you go letting all your air pressure out though, it is worth remembering the environment that World Cup racers are racing in. They have access to technical zones normally twice a lap, so if they puncture they can change a wheel relatively fast. And they also have access to the best mechanics in the world and relatively disposable wheels. So it means that if a wheel breaks, they don't have to worry about it too much. Of course, they're not deliberately running low pressures that will cause punctures, as that will still ruin their race. But they do have a bigger safety net than the rest of us. We don't have spare wheels or mechanical assistance at the side of the trail, so we do need to fine-tune our pressures a bit if we're heading out just on our Sunday XC loop. That said, there's much more to it than just having a backup plan. One of the main reasons that pros can get away with much lower tyre pressures these days is the rim and tyre combination that they're using. A quick look at Nino Schurter's bike reveals that he's running a 30mm internal rim width paired with a 2.4 tyre. That wider rim gives the tyre a bigger footprint and more sidewall stability. So even at really low pressures, the tyre doesn't roll or burp air in the corners. Paired with the right casing and tread, it means he can really push the limits of grip without sacrificing rolling speed. We're even starting to see a lot of cross-country riders opting to use tyre inserts now to help them get away with these lower tyre pressures. Brands like Vittoria even make an XC-specific one now that at a much lighter weight, so you can get that rim protection and sidewall stability without having much of a weight penalty. That being said, most of us aren't running World Cup XC bikes with perfectly tuned wheels and brand new tyres every weekend. It's also worth bearing in mind that if you're running slightly narrower tyres or narrower rims, you may not have half the support of something that's wider. To put the different tyre pressures to the test, I've picked out my local XC loop with a little bit of everything. It's got some steep, rough climbs, some loose descents, as well as some faster, smoother bits as well to really test how the tyre pressures perform. So as well as thrashing a few laps around our XC loop, there are a few key sections I'm going to pick out to really see how the different tyre pressures perform. One of the key sections is going to be a really rough, rooty technical climb, and then I can really get an idea of how the different tyre pressures affect the traction. And then the next bit is going to be this really fast bike parky style descent, but with a few rougher sections as well. Because one of the things I really noticed when I dropped those lower pressures that we see the World Cup athletes using is how much the tyre rolls on the large berms. So I'm really interested to see when I drop my pressures how much this affects the bike handling. The tyres I'm going to be using today are some proper thoroughbred XC tyres with a Vittoria Peyote on the rear and a Vittoria Mezcal up front, both in a 2.4. I've purposely chose Vittoria's fastest rolling tyres, as this will be a true test of how tyre pressure affects the grip and feel of the bike. I'm going to be using them with some Reynolds Black Label 309 XC wheels. These are Reynolds all new XC wheel set and they look amazing. They've got new features like an asymmetric profile and Reynolds proprietary MR5 carbon layup. This helps make them light, compliant, but strong enough to deal with the gnarlier XC courses that we're seeing these days. More relevant to our test though, they do have a 30mm internal rim width, so pair this with a newer generation 2.4 tyre and it should feel amazing. So we're going to start the test with some pressures that I consider to be pretty robust for almost all types of XC riding. I'm a pretty light rider at 62 kilograms, so I can get away with quite low pressures to start with. So I'm going to start with 24 PSI in the rear and 23 PSI up front. So I'm running a little bit more pressure in my rear tyre than the front, just because I find it's a bit more susceptible to punctures and rim damage, because most of your weight's over that back tyre. Then for the rest of the test, what I'm going to do is I'm going to drop out 2 PSI per lap until we get down to that magical 15 PSI that some of the World Cup races have been running. Anyway, enough chat from me. Let's get into the testing. So I've just finished my first 2 laps and I'm just about to head to the start for my 3rd one. We're starting to get into that really low pressures now. So I've just dropped to 18 on the rear and 17 on the front and it's feeling really soft. I have to say, like, just getting up to where we've started the lap, the traction on the climb felt amazing, but I have noticed as we've dropped a little bit of pressure out, I'm starting to feel like quite squirmy on the bike park corners. So it's interesting how the pressure can feel amazing for one part of the trail, but ultimately, if it doesn't ride well on like the bike park turns, you'd probably run a higher pressure. But yeah, it's gonna be interesting. I'm dropping it still a little bit lower than this in the next run, so I'm gonna be interested to see how I get on. So I'm just about to head up for my last lap now, so I'm going to drop the pressures to 15 in the front and 16 in the rear. I've done the laps just previously with 2 PSI and more, and to be honest, I've been really surprised with how good it feels. Other than those like really bike parky style berms where I can feel the tyre folding a lot, on the rest of our sort of XC test track, it feels really comfortable and I'm getting so much traction. I actually feel really confident on the bike. I'm wondering where dropping 2 PSI out will be the limit now. I think sort of having 17 in the front and 18 in the rear, if that's a sweet spot, by dropping it 2 more PSI, am I just going to be going too low now? But yeah, I'm going to drop it to 15 PSI, head out for my last lap. You're not going to be able to see that on the camera, but that is 15 PSI now. So that is about 2 or 3 PSI less than I've ever run in my tyres before. So I'm really interested to see how I get on this lap. So I've just done a lap on every tyre pressure and it's been a really interesting day out actually. I will be honest with you, we went into this test with the idea that we were going to time every lap, and after 2 laps we ended up realising that using times to see which is the best tyre pressure wasn't really the fairest way to judge them, because ultimately there's so many variables on a timed XC lap, and without power meter pedals and how much you can learn the track, there was so much that was going to influence it. I didn't think it was the best way to describe how well the tyres felt. So actually what I did after each lap was I put a few notes into my notes app on my phone just on how they felt. So I started with 24 psi in the rear and 23 psi up front, which I thought was like a very good go-to pressure. But actually when I started dropping the pressure, I realised sort of how much performance and grip I was losing from running the pressure so much harder. I mean, I think it is one of those things where if you just want to go out and ride and not have to worry about punctures or hitting your rim, running your pressures a bit higher is the way to go. But if you're really looking to eke out that performance, when I got into the lower pressures, so when I started going into the 20s and even lower, I couldn't believe, especially on a short travel cross-country bike, how much comfort I got from the bike, but also how much grip I got. So on this steep climb, the extra grip I got was insane. And even descending, so I was sort of, at the end there, I got all the way down to 15 in the front, and I was really concerned to start with how much I felt like I was going to hit the rim. But ultimately, like with modern suspension, 120mm of suspension, that just wasn't an issue. I can really see why the World Cup XC riders are running lower pressures. So ultimately, you're probably interested to know what was my favourite tyre pressure. Although 15-16 psi did feel amazing when we got into them big bike park berms, they felt so sort of unsettling and unstable. Wasn't the most confidence inspiring. I think for me the sweet spot was that high teens, so 18-19 psi around there. Just was a good compromise between grip but still enough support in the corners. So I think for me that's around the sweet spot for cross-country riding, probably what I'm going to run now, so little bit less than what I was racing on back in the day. I think it is worth noting, ultimately, what works for me, my bike and my weight isn't going to work for you. So don't start just running the same pressures that I run, like in the same way that we can't just copy the setups that pros are using. But I think it does really make it quite an interesting thing of, if you've never experimented with your tyre pressures before, it's worth going out in the woods just with a little pressure gauge, starting with a high pressure and just dropping a couple PSI out each time, because like I said at the start of the video, it's one of those things that's free to do. And I was amazed by how much sort of performance and grip I could eke out the tyres. And with the modern high volume tyres, you can actually drop them way lower than you think. So let me know what you guys think. Are you still running higher tyre pressures, or have you experimented with lower tyre pressures as well? I know this is very specific to XC, but I'd be interested to hear what you guys think. Have you dropped into the teens, or are you still running 25 PSI? Let me know down in the comments. If you like this video, please give us a like and a subscribe, and I'll see you in the next one. Cheers.